Welcome back, or welcome to my channel where I mostly just talk about books. This video is my monthly reading wrap-up. I ended up reading a lot more than I thought I would. I don't want this video to be too long. I usually have a lot to say about books, so I will try my absolute best to summarize the books that I read in what I liked, what I didn't like, etc., etc. Obviously, everything I say about these books are my own opinion. I try to stay as objective as possible. I try to also talk about who these books would be good for, even if they weren't good for me. First book I read in April was Inheritance by Christopher Paolini. This is the fourth book in the Inheritance cycle of the Eragon series, as many people know. And as you can see, I took many little notes on it. I do tend to note quite a bit when I read. This one had especially a lot of notes because basically all of these little stickies in here are moments that I thought were unnecessary in the book or felt like filler. As you can tell, this wasn't my favorite book. I did have the audiobook from my library, thank goodness, so it was a lot easier to get through it. The audiobook was a little strange though. The guy who was reading it would oftentimes have the dragons sound like cave trolls, like they would growl, like it was weird. But basically this book is fourth book in the whole series. I did talk about the entire series. I'll put it up in the cards somewhere if you want to check that out. To summarize all of it, if you don't know, it is an epic fantasy, a young adult epic fantasy about a world with elves, dwarves, humans, magicians, a bunch of other stuff, and dragons. Dragons are nearly extinct because of the tyrannical king, and this young boy, well, he found a dragon and he is the last of this huge inheritance of being a dragon rider. The last book is, of course, this big battle that we are expecting against Eragon and the tyrannical king Galbatorix. Now, this book is hefty. It's big. And something that I criticized a lot in the past video, and that I will still say now, is there's a lot of unnecessary stuff in here. It is very prolonged, lots of detail, lots of stuff that you don't even really need to know. Even so, the magic system in this book, in my personal opinion, was attempted to be more complicated than it actually was. And yet there were loopholes everywhere. One person was suddenly super powerful, and someone else who still was the same age as them and had the same power as them is just weaker. Of course, there are these random explanations in there that are just like, oh, well, this is why. So I had a lot of issues with this. On top of that, the main character, not my favorite. I tended to prefer a lot of the side characters more. So that's kind of what saved this book, was the side stories that happened, the battles that happened on their side instead of Eragon's side, a lot of stuff like that. Overall, I would say this book would be really good for someone who loves a truly epic fantasy with so much description and big world building and a lot of political stuff in it too. Someone who is interested in a story that is going to bring you back to elves, dwarves, all that high fantasy stuff. I wouldn't recommend this book for anyone who wants a quick read though. The book I read after Inheritance was Vicious by V.E. Schwab. I did a full review on this book. I will also link that up in the cards. I promise not all of these books got a full review. This book was amazing to read after Inheritance because it was fast-paced. It did not have excessive descriptions of things, and it worked so well because of it. This story is extremely character-driven. So basically, this story is about heroes and villains, a hero and a villain, but it's shaded a little more. All the characters are morally gray, and there's all these areas that really make you think more about how one character is and how another one is in comparison to them. And you don't really think any of them are good, except maybe one. Basically, the story of this book is two friends in college. They're like science majors, medical majors, and they research extraordinaries, EOs. And what happens is these two friends end up kind of diverging. They both have a different idea of how to treat and how to respond to extraordinaries, people with extraordinary abilities. And it becomes this entire story of these two characters who believe that they are right in what they think. And it's just a battle of morals, really. Now, I really would recommend this book for anyone who wants a quick story, something that has a fast pace. It had a thriller-esque type of narrative and pace that really made me read it really quickly and be very invested in everything that happened. On top of that, there is a trope in here that I absolutely love. I die for it every time. It's that intimidating male figure or character and the adopted child, right? I don't know if any of you guys have ever watched Bleach, but that's your typical Kenpachi and Yachiru. I love it. I die for that trope every time. So if you want a book with that in it, this has it in there. Also the morally gray, a lot of like philosophical questions in here too sometimes that I do enjoy when I read. So I recommend this book for anyone who wants something like that. After Vicious, Stephen King's Salem's Lot. Although I'm not sure if it's supposed to be Salem's Lot. I don't know. So this is the first Stephen King book I ever read. I scare easy, which is why I didn't read Stephen King for a very, very long time, despite people telling me how amazing he is, what a great author he is, the stories that he weaves. I wouldn't read it because I can't watch a scary movie. Turns out I love horror books. So this is his second book, and it follows the story of a writer, Ben Mears, who comes back to his hometown, or the town he lived in between the ages of like 5 and 9, the town of Jerusalem's Lot in Maine. And what happens is a vampire story. Everyone in the town starts turning into vampires. Now, what was a little bit difficult with this book was, at first it seemed very slow, and there were so many characters being introduced because you have this all-seeing eye POV over the town. And you get every single person in town with their like husbands and wives and kids and the shit that they do, and essentially you get these pretty gruesome and terrible aspects of humans, right? On top of them being turned into vampires in some pretty vicious ways. So I really did love this story for the way that it was, that point of view. At first it was really hard, but I loved it at the end about how you could see the whole town and you could see their dirty secrets and then how they end up being butchered, and there was some stuff that was very gruesome, but I loved it. It turns out I hate scary movies, but I love scary books. Highly recommend this book if you are someone who likes a psychological thriller, who likes the gruesome and the questionable things and the dirty little secrets of humans and what they do in the dark and stuff like that. So this was recommended to me as a Stephen King book, like one that I should read as an introduction to Stephen King, and I would say the same to anyone else. This is a good introduction book. It's not too gruesome. It's not too like, terrifying and gripping, but it's good. I liked it. After Stephen King's book, I borrowed a book from my library, Black Sun. I heard so much about this book that I was like, you know what? Let's go ahead and read it. So Black Sun was, to me, a really amazing book. Not only because it's the world that it built was really good, and the characters that it had were deep, and I was so invested in them, but also because of the type of fantasy. A lot of us are used to this European westernized idea of fantasy, like in Aragon, for example, or Inheritance, or even Vicious. But Black Sun had this type of fantasy that was more like pre-Columbian, Aztecs, Mayans, African cultures, but all of that meshed into a fantasy world. So the societies in this book, the types of rituals and religions and the persecutions and all of that was really interesting, and I loved how it turned all of that into an amazing fantasy story. The writing was not excessive, like there wasn't too much description, there wasn't a bunch of info dump. It went right into it, and I gotta say the beginning of the story was a little bit shocking. I was a little bit like, okay, this is how we're gonna start. Cool, whatever. So it got me into it right away. Again, I said the characters, I love them. I will not retract that. Every character was super interesting. I also loved the inclusion of gender identity and relationships and all of that. The politics in it were really interesting, not too pushed, not too heavy, comprehensive. Everything about this book was amazing, and it's going to be a trilogy, and I cannot wait to see the next book because I'm really interested in this series. Really loved it. I highly recommend it for anyone who wants a fantasy story that is not your typical westernized version of fantasy, something that's a little different. I recommend it for anyone who wants something that changes the relationships around. It's not just your straight hetero relationships. I mean, it's there, but there's other stuff too. There's a different aspect to gender identity. And also anyone who just wants a really good story with amazing characters and magic systems. The magic system was interesting. Unfortunately, after Black Sun followed Stupeur et Tremblement by Amélie Nothomb. I do have this version in French, so I am trilingual. I speak English, French, and Portuguese, and I can read in all three of these languages. So this book was gifted to me by a family who told me, oh, you're going to love this book. It's super funny. I beg to differ. I'll start off with what it's mostly about. You're following this young girl, I'm assuming she's like college age, and she is working at a Japanese firm in Japan. She has a 1-year contract, and basically what happens is she fails at everything. She messes up everything, somehow. I don't know why. And the writing in itself, it's beautiful French prose, but I didn't find it funny. The reason I didn't find it funny is basically you have this girl who supposedly she's not completely stupid. She's just overwhelmed by everything she has to do for this firm because at one little part of the book she was able to make a good report, right? Cohesive, well-written, and good. But then after that she just fails at everything. She can't even do math properly to figure out a budget. So you're supposed to feel sympathy for this girl for how she's overwhelmed by her treatment in this firm. And she can't get out. She has a contract. She can't leave, and they can't fire her. So they're also stuck with her. What made it not funny was that there's this constant racism from the Japanese to her as a Western woman, as a French girl. They just insulted her constantly or made snide comments about how, oh, well, in the West, you know, that's just how they are. Essentially being inefficient, having no honor, and just things like that. And I was like, this really doesn't feel right. Now, this was written in 1999, but it made the book like almost impossible for me to read. This book's only 180 pages, and I didn't want to finish it. I pushed through it, I still finished it. The ending wasn't even that satisfying. But, you know, maybe some people will like this. It is supposed to be a satiric story. It's supposed to be humorous, and the writing was good. But overall, the amount of racism that happened and the number of times that it was mainly you're just seeing her having breakdown moments and kind of losing her mind. After a while, I just didn't care about what would happen next, and I didn't care about the ending. But if you do want a short story that gives you a pretty good perspective on French humor and French writing, I do recommend this for you if you want that. But if you're not interested in any like racial connotations or, you know, racism about the Japanese towards the westernized people, then don't read this. The last book that I read was House of Earth and Blood by Sarah J. Maas. I heard a lot of different opinions about Sarah J. Maas's writing. Mainly what I heard, and I don't do a whole lot of research on authors. I typically just look and see if I'm interested, and if I'm not, I usually don't bother. Unless someone recommends, I try. I don't like, I put it down. So Sarah J. Maas, I heard a lot that she wrote young adult fiction, and that it's usually like fraught with sexual tension and stuff like that. So I wasn't super interested. But I went to my library. My librarian recommended it. She said, if you like fantasy and you like adult, read this. I'm gonna say I was pleasantly surprised. I really was. Mind you, I would not say that this book is like extraordinary and that everyone should read it. No. I guess I'll give a quick synopsis of what this book is. It starts off with the main character, Bryce. She has friends, turns gruesome, turns then into a mystery crime, turns then into like passion, but nothing really happens with that passion. Well, things happen, but it's mostly in the back of both of their heads, whatever. I didn't really care too much that nothing actually happened. And then finally turns into big battle, epic fights and action. All right? It's a lot of stuff. The reason that I did like this book is A, there's so much swearing, and I swear like a sailor, so I really connected with that. B, all of the dirty stuff that the characters thought in their heads, I also connect with that because I'm honest about it. I see someone hot down the street, I have things going through my head, and that's what happened with a lot of these characters. Now, the other thing that I found really interesting is basically the whole story to me, it felt like a YA type of story. But with all the swearing, with all the sexual connotations, and sometimes not so much connotations, with the language and with some of the pretty gruesome things that were happening, it was adult. But again, it's like a veiled YA story. So to me, it honestly felt like this book was written by a sexually frustrated, bad-mannered high school girl. That's what it felt like. And I liked it. So really, this book to me is like a guilty pleasure book. If you want a book that has a bunch of sexual connotation, it's not really there for the plot all that much, but more for like the character interactions. The dialogues were hilarious. There was so much swearing. I personally really liked it for that. Another thing I found interesting, I'll just make it my last note, is the world that it's in. So I didn't really understand most of it, to be completely honest. And I think that was kind of the point, because you have like essentially shifters, so werewolves, fox, any kind of animal you can think of, people can shift into it. There were fae people, so fairies, sprites, what else? Angels, demons, so many different things, and yet they had a society where they lived together, but not really. So I think the point of the whole world that Sarah J. Maas built is that it was supposed to be chaotic. It's not supposed to function, and that's why a lot of the stuff in this story were pretty gruesome, pretty terrible. And there were some really interesting points in the book, like some discussions that could be made about depression and trauma and slut-shaming and different things like that. So I think this book was really nice. Will I recommend it to everyone I walk by? No, I will not. Because, again, it's more of a guilty pleasure book. Overall, the plot isn't the best aspect of it. The characters, the dialogue, the gruesome and the raunchy and the swearing like a sailor, I like that. So yeah, I did cry in this book too. So if you like this video, feel free to subscribe and like. And of course, if you read some of these books, or if you want to ask me some questions about these books, feel free to comment that below. Be nice, please. And if you want to check out anything else I do, there are links in the description. I also have a Patreon for any exclusive stuff. I do a monthly reading vlog that is exclusive to the Patreon only, so feel free to check that out too. Thanks for hanging out. I will see you next time. Bye.